Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope your day has been productive in our parallel sessions that have been going on since we were with each other this morning. I've had a fantastically productive day that I just wanted to share with you for a second. I'm sure there's many people in the room who are big fans of the mathematics of network theory and things like that, yes, and I'm sure there's probably also a few Game of Thrones fans in the room. I write popular mathematics books as a bit of a sideline, and I try and find reference points to introduce to fairly young audiences intros into sort of higher, beautiful mathematics. And I saw a paper the other day online, and I corresponded with the guy and got permission from him just a couple of hours ago to include in my next book this full colour graphic of something he did. Have a look at this slide here. He went through all the episodes of Game of Thrones and worked out who talked to who hung out with who killed who, to build up this network diagram to try and work out who's the true protagonist in Game of Thrones, who were the most important characters and in what. There's no spoilers there, it doesn't matter, it includes what's going on. But how awesome is that as a marriage of some, fairly important higher mathematics with something completely new? So it's a sad reflection on me, but the highlight of my day was getting an email from that guy going, yeah, you can use that. I'm just so excited. Okay, I'm also very excited about our next speaker. I know you're going to want to ask questions, so do it through the conference app, interactive button there. The abstract says it all. The speaker was drawn into the very middle of defending RSA security against a serious military-grade cyber hack in 2011. Yes, that one, it says. Now, obviously, from the way it says that one, I can safely assume you all know which serious military-grade cyber attack against RSA security that we're talking about here. At the same time, I'm sure you all know that you can safely assume that I've got absolutely no idea which serious military-grade cyber attack against RSA security we're talking about. I'm very excited to find out what it is all about. Here he is to speak to us. He is an RSA Distinguished Engineer, Bill Duane, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for having me here. This is my actual second time at the conference, speaking at the conference. And I have to say, I really like the new venue, and I think AusCERT's been doing a great job. I've been personally actually enjoying quite a few of the talks this year, so good on AusCERT for the conference this year. I guess I'm a little bit of a different speaker than maybe you're used to for keynotes. I'm not a professional speaker. I'm not a malware expert. I'm not a cyber warfare expert. I'm actually an engineer who happened to have his butt thrown into one of the worst nightmares of my life in the middle of a cyber attack. And it's really to share a little bit about that with you and hope that, some ideas that I have about how you might defend yourself a little bit differently and how the attackers really work might help you should you ever unfortunately be found in a similar kind of situation. So to start it off, early in the spring of 2011, I was a happy guy sitting in my office working on some cryptographic algorithms. And I should point out that this is probably one of the only audiences in the world where I can say that where someone doesn't laugh at me. But nonetheless, a fellow engineer came into my office and said to me, I need your help. There's been an unusual access to one of our secure servers. Now, when we talked a little bit further to the administrator, what the administrator found was that a single inactive account had one single permission on it that shouldn't have been set. There was no evidence whatsoever in the log files. There was no other evidence anywhere in the system. And frankly, I thought the guy was nuts. But he persisted. He was a very compulsive type administrator and insisted that this permission should not be there. And as we pulled on that thread really started the nightmare that basically entirely took over my life for 1 month. Family life, everything was gone for a month. And if you include the remediation and repair, lasted well over a year. And so that's really we're going to do it. Now, as has been discussed in the press, it's pretty clear that the cyber attack was really an effort by the attacker to get at military secrets in a defense contractor, and the defense contractor was using RSA technology to protect themselves, and the RSA technology was annoying, so they decided to come after RSA. And the attack against RSA was really using advanced military-grade weaponry. It consisted of many things, but it included advanced persistent threats and zero-day malware. And RSA as a commercial entity doesn't have the ability to actually identify who an attacker of that is, but General Alexander, then head of the NSA, did say in a public Senate forum that it was China's military that had attacked RSA as well as a number of other companies within the US at that time. And shortly thereafter, Mandiant Research and the New York Times published an article talking about these attacks, and they even included the specific Chinese People Liberation Army unit that had mounted the attack, including a picture of that group. And of course, I reacted to this information in the most appropriate way that I could. But being a part of this cyber attack opened a door to me that, especially being an engineer, this whole arena of advanced cyber weaponry, cyber attacks that I had never really fully understood, and many of my assumptions about how these things work turned out to be wrong. And I think partly due to RSA's openness, which at the time was a bit unusual, and in fact we took it on the chin for being fairly open about the fact that we've been attacked. We had things like competitors using it against us in marketing literature, and we had a lot of negative press about it. But I think that openness, together with the fact that I was working with multiple countries' intelligence agencies, FBI, NSA, Homeland Security, and police departments, gave me insight into other cyber attacks. And what this talk really is a distillation of what I've learned by talking to these other people that have had similar accounts in Nevermind. So I'm not going to talk any details about the RSA breach itself or any other customers that have brought the information. I'm going to talk about the general techniques and tactics that I see going on there. So let's start off by talking a bit about the attackers. You've heard from some other presentations in the conference that these are professionals. These are not hackers. This is in fact their day job. We would actually see evidence in multiple of these attacks that the attackers would work a regular day, and then they close their notebooks and they go home to their wife and kids, presumably, and come back and do the job the next day. They also took off vacations. They took off vacations in their country, but of course the attacks were time shifted by whatever country was attacking us versus our local time, but nonetheless it was their normal day. And interestingly enough, they even took off American holidays, which at first confused us because it was a little trouble to figure out where they were coming from. But then when you think about it, it's fairly obvious why they do that. The amount of traffic going on within the network drops precipitously when the Americans are not working, and if they continue to do their work, higher probability they'd be detected, and therefore one of the benefits of having this kind of a job is that you get both your local holidays and the country you're attacking's holidays off. And I should say that these attackers, I have a respectable set of skills. I mean, they're quite impressive. But I should be really clear that I do not admire them at all. They have great talent, and they use their talent to do damage to other companies, to steal the hard developed work that's done by other companies for their own use. They damage companies in a way that puts employees and their families at risk. And so I really don't find any of this laudable. But nonetheless, I have to respect the fact that they're professionals and respect the set of talent that they operate with. And I can say to you that they do operate with military precision. So what do I mean by that? If we start off looking at some of the attributes of the attackers, they have clear command and control structure in operation. So you'll see in these types of breaches that attackers are walking down a certain set of script, a set of worker bees are working down a set of scripts, and then all of a sudden they may run into a problem and can't proceed. Something wasn't unexpected and they get stuck. They'll disappear for a while, and then maybe an hour later, they'll come back and take a right-hand turn and start doing things very differently. And it's pretty clear what's happened is the worker bees went back up their chain of command to the experts that have more knowledge and tools, got a new set of scripts, came back down and started executing on the new set of scripts. Extensive reconnaissance. Prior to any of these attacks, these attackers have done amazing amounts of reconnaissance. This usually is, in most cases, a little unclear how they've got all this reconnaissance. It's clear that they read your email. They're in your email system, they're reading all your emails, trying to suck as much information out of them as they can. In addition to that, though, especially given the budgets they have, it's highly likely that they're resorting to extortion or blackmail of former employees or existing employees as well. So for instance, in our case, I had the FBI examine my background and anyone's background who had any information that was related to the breach in any way. They attack on multiple fronts. So often I hear the situation where someone in a breach comes up and says, it was really weird at the beginning because I thought how unfortunate I was to have multiple attacks going on at the same time. But these attacks seem disjoint. They have different targets, they're using different tools, they may be proceeding at different rates. And so you think, oh my God, I have multiple different attackers hitting me at the same time. But over time, what happens is you discover that something that one team learned appears in an attack in a different team. And they're actually coordinated teams who are independently achieving objectives, but sharing through the command and control structure the information that they learn and therefore amplifying the effect across the set of attacks that they're mounting against you. They have a mix of weaponry type. There was a lot of discussion about this in the press about RSA. The initial vector that was disclosed was that we had a spear phishing attack. The spear phishing attack launched a 0-day in the environment. This is not a particularly unusual thing. But that's quite a mix there. You have a very off-the-shelf, simplistic thing like a spear phishing attack coupled with an extremely expensive one-time use 0-day malware. 0-day malware in the open market runs for millions to tens of millions of dollars. And they were willing to yield that in order to get their foothold in the environment. And they do have quite a mix. I mean, they'll use phishing, farming attacks, they'll use unpatched vulnerabilities in your environment because they've done reconnaissance, they know what patch levels you're at. Where possible, they'll use those attacks and use them against you. And I will mention that I heard of an interesting, they're smart about how they evolve the attacks and they're cost effective where they can be. And what I mean by that is I heard from an intelligence agency that the same actor at a later point in time decided they want to be clear, I guess this is asserting that they wanted to be a bit more cost effective, so they started breaching banks on the West Coast of the United States. Why would they do that? They know that because a lot of high-tech companies have employees on the West Coast that need to do home banking. Those employees would take their notebooks home, go to do the home banking, they get infected with a rat, bring their notebook back into work, and they now, by infecting a limited number of commercial banks, had infected a huge number of firms across the high-tech industry on the West Coast. So they have quite an advanced set of weaponry available to them. They deploy adaptive tactics. They have plan Bs available so that when they're starting marching down one avenue, hit a problem, they can execute another plan, as we kind of mentioned before. They deploy decoy maneuvers. So you'll see that you'll have an attack going off in your network that's noisy. It's generating a lot of noise. They're not cleaning up well after themselves. It's something that becomes to the level of attention to your CERC or your SOC people. Well, what it is a decoy. That's there purposely so that your personnel will turn their attention and try and figure out what that noisy attack is doing, while very slowly, low and slow in the background, the other attacks are slowly gaining their objective, and they use extremely slow, very quiet communications to move their data out and very low levels of command and control information. And the first thing they do when they get into your environment is they drop backdoors for ongoing surveillance and so that they can repenetrate your network at a later time. My recommendation, just like we did at RSA, is that even if you haven't had a breach, you should treat your network as dirty. Why? Because you're probably going to have a breach someday. And if you start planning and operating your network as if it's dirty, you'll be in a lot better situation to protect yourselves than if you continue to assume that your corporate network is secure. So let's take a minute and look at the targeted assets that the attackers typically go after. First, well, that's okay. First is keys. Some of the holy grail that they go after are code signing keys and device driver signing keys. People typically know why device driver signing keys are so important to them. It's really because code signing keys you maybe can revoke as a vendor if you believe they've been compromised. But device driver assigning keys are checked in kernel mode by the operating system when the device driver is loaded. The operating system can't do OCSP callouts to a provider to check the validity of the signature out of kernel mode. Furthermore, they can't load large CRL lists or the equivalent into memory in kernel mode to do it checking. So the net result is that device driver certificates don't ever really get checked for revocation status. So once they get them, they have the ability to create trusted malware that can't be revoked, essentially. Your intellectual property is another, in terms of other keys, by the way, license generation keys and license keys, why do they want to do that? They're stealing your product to help their own companies within their country, and this allows them to make copies of it and have valid licenses. Encryption keys that you're using to protect your product are also another set of assets that they target. Your code is important to them because they can then make clones of your product or use it to examine your product for weaknesses that they can make custom malware that goes directly after your product. Same with things like your core libraries and crypto libraries. Your defect lists. Little did you know that this is another piece of holy grail for the attacker. You're telling them in your defect list exactly where your problems are so they can make custom malware to take advantage of that defect against you. They'll look for patents, product architectures, roadmaps, any of the things here. And then lastly, customer information. They'll look for PII information. They'll look for PCI information. They'll go after customer lists, and one that you may not think of is that a lot of companies have phone home type networks or maintenance networks where you can connect into a customer's environment to do maintenance on products that you've sold there. Guess what? This is ideal for them because they can bootstrap through your network directly into your customer's network and affect them as well. Now, depending upon what kind of attacker you have, if it's a military attacker, military government, okay, maybe keys and intellectual property are more what they're looking for, not maybe so much customer information. If you have organized crime mounting an advanced cyber attack, they may be going after PCI data so they can monetize it. Maybe if you have a hacktivism advanced cyber attack, they're going after customer data so they can embarrass you via your customers. So it varies a little bit depending upon who the actor is coming after you, but this is kind of the stuff that we see them going after. Tools and techniques. Let's talk a little bit about what kind of tools they use. Very first one you've heard about is a compromise. Now, we're going to spend a few minutes on the next bullet, which is related to this, but I want to talk for a sec about the fact the accounts compromise that they use didn't quite work the way I thought it did. They don't look for an admin account and then blow through your network in an admin account. They look for admin accounts, then they find a system they're interested in, log in as administrator, create or uplift an existing account with privileges that have the set of privileges necessary to do the task they want, log out of the admin account, and come back in as that account. So why do they do that? The reason is all our monitoring on admin accounts means that the longer they sit in an admin account, the higher the probability is we're going to detect them. They know that, so they get out of the admin account as quickly as they can and log into a regular user account with uplifted privileges. This is probably the biggest thing. This is one of the most important things I want you to take away from this talk. Memory cached password hashes. If you don't understand pass-to-hash attacks, I strongly, strongly encourage you to read up on it and spend a lot of time to learn about pass-to-hash attacks. Okay, look, this is worth a few seconds. I hope this doesn't mess me up with time. But modern operating systems have gotten so complex that if you actually had to log in every time you touched a network resource, every time you touched a printer, a file share, whatever, you'd go insane. You just wouldn't be able to do your job. So all modern operating systems, Windows, Linux, whatever, will, when you log in, take the hash that you use to log in and cache it up in memory. And when you're not looking and you touch the printer or the file share, it replays that hash as if you were logging in order to get you logged into that service. So it's really an ease of use feature. Okay? Now, unfortunately, our operating systems nowadays are so complex that the operating systems have lost track of the use count and they don't know when they can get rid of these things. And they create lots of variations. Like in Windows, it's not just the login hash that you have. There's the Kerberos tickets cached, the ticket granting tickets cached. The NTLM version of it is created and cached. They create all the backwards compatibility hash values that they need and store them in memory as well. The attackers know this. They know that you can't get rid of these things. So every time you boot a system, memory starts accumulating these hash values, and they keep accumulating and accumulating, and they stay there until the next time you reboot the system. So what do the attackers do? They don't go after your hash database, the password file. They suck them right out of memory. They pull them out of memory with the memory extraction tools, and then they're able to actually use them as if they had a password. They have tools that they can either crack them to regain the ASCII equivalent of it, or more often they use tools that have interfaces that will accept the hash value without having to go all the way back to the ASCII equivalent. This attack, this pass-the-hash attack, is brutal. This is really nasty. Now, why is it so bad? Every network I know of, when they deploy systems in the network, set the local administrator account to the same thing, so that an admin can walk up to any system in the enterprise, log in, and do their job. I don't think I've found a single company yet that doesn't do that. And guess what? All they have to do is find one system in your environment where the administrator had to come in either under a remote procedure or manually or whatever to do a management operation, and that remote admin password is cached in memory. They've now got you. You're dead meat because they can log into any system they want using that local admin password. Okay, so I think I've spent enough time in that. Strongly, strongly encourage you to read up on pass-the-hash attacks, and especially because I'm not as much an expert in Linux, but Windows 8 started doing some improvements with people like me and other people begging Windows to change on this. Windows 10 has even more advanced features to help defeat pass-the-hash attacks. They cost you, and there's problems with them, but I strongly encourage you to read up on the mitigations for some of the pass-the-hash attacks. Single sign-on in almost every corporate environment I know of uses single sign-on services so that once a user logs into the domain, they can chain through to other services. The attackers love this because that means they don't have to break any access into these environments. Once they have one of your employees' accounts, they have single sign-on services, you just help the attacker. Nesting, this is another interesting thing that I didn't realize worked. It worked differently than I guess I thought it worked. I thought the attackers got into the network and hopped from system to system gathering the information they want. They don't do that. They get into the network until they can find the local admin account. They then look for something like one of your corporate file shares, and they create a nest in it. The corporate file share has got lots of I/O activity going on. It's got people interactive and non-interactive logins happening all the time. It's got a bunch of disk space at their disposal. And they create a nest there, and then they use tools to reach out remotely, get what they want, bring it back to the nest so they can then pack it up and exfiltrate it out of your company. So they exhibit this kind of nesting behavior. In terms of exfiltration or moving the data out of your environment, the most common thing they see is that they use something like encrypted RAR segments. So they'll bring the data in, pack it up into RAR using RAR, and then they slowly exfiltrate the RAR packets out of the environment. The fact that they use encryption, by the way, is particularly annoying. and it sounds funny to have someone who's a cryptographer kind of saying that, but the truth is, if you can see inside of one of these exfiltration packages, they're like gold. And we were lucky enough that we were testing a product from a company called NetWitness at the time, which creates network-based memory, if you want to think of it as a buffer on your network ports. And we could actually capture exfiltration packages and try and look at them. Now, often we'd miss parts of the RAR transmission. We miss a segment here or there. And I'm not sure that many other companies, other than a deep crypto company, would have been able to take an encrypted, a file encrypted with RAR that was missing segments, reverse engineer it, and get back the contents of what was in there. But when we saw it, it was very enlightening. Because not only did they transmit out any of the captured information they're looking for, they send out their scripts and they send out the tools they use so that when they later on look at it, they can understand what they've done. And that's really enlightening. Seeing their scripts and seeing the actual tools that they used was quite insightful. So where possible, you should absolutely use some mechanism for capturing exfiltrations and then have a look at inside the exfiltrations. They use your own infrastructure against you. And my favorite example of this, and I apologize for anyone who's a SQL programmer here, or SQL person, but SQL is like the attacker's best friend. And this is I'll use this as an example. SQL, sure, it makes sense if I'm sitting in my nest that I can use SQL to mount a remote database and then access the data. That's what SQL's for. I get that. That makes sense. But if you've turned on the developer tools with SQL, you're able to now execute remote procedures having all the data dumped locally. Well, wait a minute. That starts to be a little, hey, wait a minute. Attackers love that. That makes their nesting behavior easy because they can execute remote operating system level scripts and have the data come locally. Oh, the XP commands in SQL. I could go into a remote registry, read the remote registry, and start modifying data in the registry. Attackers love that. Guess where we put all our passwords and access control strings for unattended systems? And so when we build a product, if we're a product company, we strip the developer tools out. But if we're putting an IT project internal, they're almost always left on so that the IT people can walk up and do a quick update to what they're doing. Or if we have a cloud-based service, these things are often left on so that we can maintain the cloud-based service. And when we do that, we're actually handing our infrastructure as an effective tool to the attacker. Velocity. When I talk about velocity, what I mean is when these attacks start, the attackers operate low and slow. Very, very quiet. They beacon out to command and control extremely infrequently. And when they're exfiltrating, it's a trickle of data. And it's all in an effort not to be detected. But should they detect that you're onto them, they switch to smash and grab. And they will just lock, stock, destroy a system, rip out as much data as they can. Don't worry about cleaning up the logs. Don't worry about cleaning up any evidence that are there. Just rip it out and get it out of the network as fast as they can. If we compare the environment of you versus the attacker, it's a bit depressing, to be quite honest. Let's look at time. Time is their friend and time is your enemy. They have full control over the pace of the attack, and you have no control over the pace of the attack. With the increased amount of bandwidth we see every year, with the increasing amount of CPU speed we see every year, with the increasing I/O rates our computers have every year, these allow the attacker to move faster and faster every year, especially since they use scripted procedures. They just operate in a script and blow through it as fast as possible. Now compare this to you. How do you learn about the attacker? You learn typically about it by alerts and events. That means that something has to have been detected in a system. It's then gathered, put into the local buffer. It's transmitted to the collection host. The collection host processes it to see if there's anything unusual, and then it raises an alarm. Everything you see in a breach is in the past. Think about that. Every single thing you see in a breach is in the past. And the increasing speeds I'm talking about, the delta between when an attacker can start an attack and when you know about it is so wide now that they're long gone before you even get the alert. If that isn't enough, system forensics take hours. You know, I should pause for one quick sec. Multiple talks and keynotes have mentioned the fact that the average time an attacker is in a network is something like 150 to 250 days. My jaw was on the table when I heard that. I mean, I clearly haven't been reading enough data. In our attack and in these attacks I'm talking about right now, we were able to, in real time, deal with the attacker, stop them in some cases, or were minutes behind them or hours. We weren't 200 days behind the attacker, because when I talk about forensics taking 4 to 8 hours, in my mindset, that's an eternity. They can do so much damage in 4 to 8 hours. So when I'm thinking 200 hours, my mind is kind of blown about an attacker being in a network for 200 hours. But so when I say system forensics take hours to do, that's what I mean. In a real firefight where you're in the face of the attacker, that 4 hours can be an eternity. It can be a lot going on in that time before you figure out what's going on. They have focus and you have chaos. What I mean by that is this little mesh of railroad tracks is to indicate your network. When an attack is starting, you don't know where they're going. You don't know what they're after. You have to look at the entirety of your network and all the events that you're seeing, thousands of events per hour, to try and figure out what's going on. But the truth is they're only interested in a very small subset of the network, and they're focused on a very small set of nodes that they're going after. They can hide in plain sight. They use your own users' accounts against you, your own administrators' accounts against you, so you can't tell, is that Jane working late at night encrypting data because she's working on a secure project? Or is that Bob who's repeatedly failing to log in because he had a couple of drinks and he's having a little trouble with his password? Or is that the attacker creating RAR segments to transmit out of the company, or the attacker trying to crack an account? We make it easy for them. I mentioned some of the ways we make it easier for them already, but maybe, I'll just quickly say that in our environments, I almost hate to say this because I sound like I'm anti-ease of use and anti-making it easy for customers, but we make it so easy for our employees and so easy for our customers and our partners that many of those things we do make it very easy for the attacker. Sure, I want to let my developers work at home so they can work on the code when they don't feel like coming in today. And they should be able to have access to all the code bases so that they can steal code from other projects and they don't have to re-engineer the code. But you know what? When the attacker gets a developer account, that means he can now remotely come in and blow through your code bases and do something with it. And so a lot of these ease of use things that we do to ourselves for the sake of ease of use actually end up helping the attacker. And you're alone. The attacker has teams of specialists working in parallel, backed up by command and control staff to help them be successful. They have a vast dark cloud of people they can leverage to get intelligence on you and to get tools necessary to do their job. They even can use the latest research by white hat researchers to help them develop even more effective attacks against you. But contrast that to you. You're bound by employee non-disclosure agreements. You're bound by contracts with your customer. You're bound by contracts with or non-disclosure agreements with the intelligence community that you can't talk to people, you can't say what's happening, you can't ask for help, you can't explain what's going on. And your intelligence community partners will share and help you, but only so much. They'll give you a little bit of data and they know a hell of a lot more than they're willing to share. So this sounds really bad, doesn't it? I mean, it is really horrible. But I'm here to say all is not lost. Not that I have all the answers, and I hope I'm not like a Henry Hoke kind of suggestions here, but I have some ideas about things that we could start to do as an industry that might help with some of these things. So the first one is we've got to figure out ways to make time our ally instead of our enemy. So here's my first example. The typical thing we do in an environment is to take our most important assets, let's say a credit card database, and shove them in a system and try and protect and instrument that system as heavily as we can. But as I said, by the time you get an alert that they're in there, it's too late, they're already gone. So maybe a better technique is for us to split that up so you have, say, the credit card number to a UID, and in a different file is the username for that to the UID, and another one's the CCV code to UID. Put them all in separate systems, and then instrument them so that if someone touches the system, you know. And then, by the way, you shouldn't be encrypting them, but that also creates a multiplier. Now you have keys that you can put in other systems. And God forbid the attacker should come in and touch any one of the systems, you now can shut down access to all other parts of the system. They may get one piece of it, but that's not going to give them their total objective. You've now used time as your ally to try and prevent the attacker from getting somewhere. Make a time chart that shows the progress of attacks and exfiltrations, because when you're working late at night at 3 in the morning, your brain is not working well, you need something graphical to help you do it. And a quick example on this one here is you might have thought that exfiltration alpha was actually a result of system X being attacked. But if you notice, it actually started some set of minutes before the attack to system X was over. Guess what? You had another attack probably somewhere earlier that you don't know about yet. So timelines can be very useful to you. Know thyself. I should have used the Game of Thrones chart for it. But this is an example network map. This is what the IT personnel and the CERT personnel deal with. They see your network as a series of links connected by IP addresses connected by links. When an attacker is touching a particular IP address, they don't know what that means. They know they're visiting this address and this address and this address, but they have no idea what the underlying meaning of that particular attack is. What you need to do is overlay a set of business process information where your critical data and business processes are on top of that IP address map, so that when an attacker touches a particular node, you can say, oh, wait a minute, that's the critical green data. That means they're probably going after green data, and I better find the other systems that have green data and do something about it. Overlaying your business processes and your business data on top of the low-level IP map can be one of the most important things you do, and allow you to ask questions like, what is the relationship between the visited systems, or are the assets stored on one visited system somehow related to another system? And this is one of the most important things you do. Now, guess what? When you do it, you better darn well not have this on your network somewhere, or your attacker is going to find it. So you have to start thinking about moving stuff into physical safes or mill-grade USB drives. Pretend to be your enemy. I hear so many people talk about doing threat models, and so few people actually doing a decent threat model. Figure out what your critical assets are. Figure out how the attacker is going to come after them. Recurse on it, saying, now that I protect it that way, how are they going to come this time? And then recurse on it again and again and again, until you get to the point where the business risk is low enough that you can tolerate it if the attacker goes after it. And again, your threat model is one of the most sensitive documents you're going to have. You better protect it carefully. How's about let's make lives a little harder for ourselves, but a lot harder for the attacker? Biggest recommendation, get rid of common local admin passwords. That one step would get rid of many pass-the-hash attacks. How's about adding some heterogeneity to our systems? Our environments are homogeneous collections of systems managed by common policies, managed with common administration. That equals common vulnerabilities. If we mixed it up a bit, we actually might have some resilience built into our network. Let's take a lesson from nature about some diversity. As I mentioned, limit the scope of single sign-ons and your domains. That way the attacker doesn't get everything when they break into one domain. And please decouple authentication into any of your custom domains away from your domain authentication. Upgrade your crypto defenses or crypto key defenses. First off, find all your crypto keys and reduce the number of copies of them that you have laying around. They're going to find them, so get them off of your network. Ones that you need, put into hardware like hardware security modules or smart card devices, so that they're write-only devices and the attacker can't extract the key material. But don't forget about your backups. Don't forget about your archives. Don't forget about your key archival procedures, because they'll intercept them there if they can't get them off your operational system. And most importantly, get them out of your automated build procedures, so that the keys for signing the code are not in automated build procedures. Put them into hardware. Consider isolationism where appropriate. What I mean by that is, in the most severe cases, you may want to fragment off part of your network with your critical business assets and run it as a separate environment, totally detached from the corporate network. This is exceedingly painful to do. Think about just getting patches or virus updates in there, or getting the alarms and alerts out. It's difficult and it's really painful. And we even got into an argument between National Security Agency that was recommending using data diodes to isolate a network, versus Homeland Security that said, no, you do that, and eventually the operators get mad and they'll find a way to circumvent it. Go ahead and please use multiple layers of different vendor firewalls with an XML gateway on top, and XML control is the way to do it. Whatever, talk to your intelligence agency and find out the best way to do it. And if you're going to do it, make darn certain that you strip your systems all the way down to their boot ROMs, and all your devices down to the ROMs, and flash them from known good sources. Otherwise, you've just left a big gaping hole in your isolated network environment. It's really awkward to make new friends, but we have to do this. We have to embrace indicator sharing standards in informal bodies for sharing information about who's attacked us, what staging servers they use, what tools they used. And it's really awkward to do this when you're sitting across the table from a competitor, saying to them, I've been breached, but here's what happened. You have to sanitize it so you don't leak any corporate information, but we have to start sharing this stuff. They're sharing information about us in their dark networks all the time. What's wrong with us as an industry that we can't figure out how to make this sharing work well for us? Getting towards the end here, the lessons from the RSA breach are pretty sobering. They spent a lot of time, money, cyber weaponry, and people to attack RSA, and I think this is my personal opinion, I think it's a pretty good chance that it was just a backup strategy, that they really got what they wanted by going directly after defense contractors, because RSA doesn't have the information they need. We don't know who gets what tokens. We don't know what users have for user IDs or PINs. We don't know who's working on what project. So they had to attack the defense contractors anyways. And if they're willing to spend this amount of money and effort as a backup strategy against one or two defense contractors, that's a pretty sobering thought. They're focused, motivated, funded, willing to spend lots of money, and they really don't care who the collateral damage is. Lest you think it's just us, you probably are a target for a cyber attack. You supply the government or defense contractors? Absolutely you are. Are you a big company that's pretty successful? Well, guess what? The military of many governments will launch cyber attacks against you to steal your intellectual property to help their local industries be successful in the marketplace against you. And if not, well, that's okay. You only have to worry about organized crime trying to monetize your assets or hacktivism trying to embarrass you. They're going to get in. They've just got the amount of budgets, weaponry, resources that can dwarf anything that a corporation can muster. And they can deploy 0 days when they have to. So the real question is, they're in your data center, what now? So I'm starting to get low on time, but I've got a few things. These are kind of recapping what we talked about, but I'll go through them quick. We've got to evolve from protecting perimeters mentality to rapid detection and response mentality. Stop putting stuff in heavily guarded systems, spread it out and instrument it and detect when people are attacking it. We've got to internalize that when we make it too easy for our customers, partners, and stuff, we're actually making it easy for the attacker and in the end hurting the people we're trying to help. Treat your corporate network as dirty. For sensitive data and processes, you have to push the security up to the application level. Don't rely on just SSL and VPNs. And start talking in terms of data protection and data protection in transit at rest. Talk to each other about our attacks. We have to let our CERT people know what's going on in the business so that they can figure out what's happening in a breach. We got to add heterogeneity to our infrastructure and get rid of local common admin so that we can deal with pass-the-hash attacks. And in the end, I've got some personal thoughts. I hope I can run a couple minutes to just tell you from a personal point of view what it's like being in a breach situation. I never worked so hard under so much stress and with so much at risk in my career. At one point, I was working every day of the week, 18 to 20 hours a day, and sleeping in a hotel for a couple hours right near work before going back in. And the strongest thing that was driving me, I'm slightly embarrassed to say, wasn't the customers, the stock price, or anything else. It was the thought that if I failed, my fellow employees would be out of work and it was going to affect the food on their tables and their kids going to school. The attackers came after me personally in my notebook and with malware injection and tried to come after me, and they realized what I was doing. I have a pretty low internet profile. In fact, the conference had to ask me for a picture because they couldn't find a picture online that they wanted to use for me. But that all got kind of destroyed by this. I suddenly popped up and I was on the radar screen of the attackers, the NSA, Homeland Security, multiple international intelligence agencies, and multiple defense contractors around the world. And the remediation and repair of this lasted over a year. The breach was bad enough, but recovering from the breach lasted over a year. We built millions of replacement tokens and gave them to customers, partially because there's no way someone's going to believe, and in fact, you can't know what was taken or not taken for certain, right? You know what you saw, but what didn't you see? So the only way to make people whole and the only way to make people trust us was to give them whole new tokens or replace them from scratch, and we did that. That cost a lot of money, and it was millions of tokens, but it was the right thing to do. It was definitely a learning experience, but an education in the hardest possible way, and one I hope never to repeat. And I hope that this helps any of you should you ever be in a similar situation. I'd like to leave you with a quote from the global services manager at work, which is that it's okay to be attacked, however, it's not okay to be a victim. Thanks.
So I'll ask you one quick question, if that's
Yep.
all right. That was unbelievable, Bill. Thank you so much. Just one quick question before we let everyone go. You talk about the intensity of it all, working from home. Were there any sort of physical manifestations of that stress for you? How did you handle it, or fail to handle such a sort of stressful event?
There was one, I mean, there are some funny stories which come out of any kind of horrible situation, but one of them was that prior to the breach, I had actually had a pretty severe concussion. And one of the effects of the concussion was that I was unable to remember anyone's name, even my closest friends' names. But I was able to work. And so when I went into work and I was in a meeting, what I would do is I would use my forearm as a scratch pad and write people's names as they mentioned them in the meeting, and then I'd rub it off and go to the next meeting. And when the breach happened, the stress was so enormous that that particular problem came back. I wasn't able to remember anyone's names. And 3 of the world's top NSA cryptographers came to help review some of the work we were doing. And I was in the meeting with them, and I would stand up in front of a board of crypto I was doing, and I looked at them and I said, "So, Margaret, as you can see," I said, "So, as you can see," and then I had to go, "Margaret," and all I could think of is they thought I was basically Rain Man, that I was able to do crypto till the cows come home, but I wasn't able to remember a simple name. So, but
This is wonderful. Bill, he has a million stories. You're going to be available at the dinner tonight, but also at the AusCERT table tomorrow if people want to come and talk about anything you've spoken about
That's
today.
right.
Big round of applause, please, for Bill Duane. That was just fantastic, Bill.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.